Welcome to Mum's Work and Chaos. I'm Louise, and this podcast is designed to help fill the gaps in your village. Each week, I sit down with a new guest. Think of it like two friends having a chat about something important. From toxic family dynamics and medical misogyny to embracing who our kids are and understanding neurodiversity, we're here to make sense of motherhood, one chaotic conversation at a time. So grab a coffee, settle in, and let's dive into this chaos together. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Mum's Work and Chaos with me, Louise. Today I'm joined by the wonderful Harriet Shearsmith. This is your second time on the podcast, so welcome. And today we're talking all about your brand new book, Unfollowing Mum. Congratulations, Harriet. How does it feel to now be an author on top of everything else?
Oh, thank you so much, and thank you for having me. It's a brilliant feeling to have this book out. It's definitely been a passion project.
Yeah, I mean, well, it all started with the podcast, didn't it? All about your own experiences of toxic parenting and all of the other stuff that you went through as a child and decided to get out of as an adult. So do you feel that writing the book was like the next step on that sort of cathartic process of working things out and you know, sort of sorting through and unpacking everything that you went through?
Yeah, I think so. And I think as well that I noticed there was a real lack of information and things out there for people who have been through similar experiences and who are looking to make the changes that are necessary, especially from a peer point of view. I feel like there is quite a bit out there now from professionals, coaches, psychologists, and people who work on the other side of the chair and are, there to support people who are going through it, but actually very little from people from a point of view of a lived perspective. So for me, I think that was really important to see that out there and to be able to offer people, the title is Unfollowing Mum, and the subtitle there is Break Unhealthy Patterns and Be the Parent You'd Wish You'd Had. And what we mean by that is being that parent who can respect your child's autonomy, who can be a parent who can see them as an individual and meet them on a level that is healthy, and who can be aware of your own traumas and that kind of thing.
I think that's I mean, I struggle with that a lot, as you know. So, as well as you choosing to, estrange yourself from your own mother, I went down that path only, just under a year ago with my own dad. I mean, we as we discussed previously, already sort of gone down that path a bit anyway. But I made that final decision to go full no contact back in Easter. And so I'm really excited to get my hands on a copy of your book. I honestly can't wait to get hold of it, because like there's a lot of times as a parent as well now that I have to check myself, and I'm like, oh, that's something that he might have said to me, or I really do get very concerned about whether I'm shaming my child or giving them some of the trauma that I've got as well. And I think from a parent's perspective, it's healthy to sit there and unpack it in a certain way and say, was what I said unacceptable? Can I go back and apologize for that? And in a lot of cases I will go back and say, I'm really sorry, I shouldn't have said that to you. It's very rare that it happens, but I do sit there and I do feel a bit worried about how my parenting is compared to the parenting I received. So yeah, I'm super excited to get my hands on a copy of your book and really go through it and look at the parenting that I'm providing compared to the parenting that I got as well. I think it will be really useful. So, like you said, the subtitle of your book is, breaking those cycles, recognizing those toxic traits as well that you've experienced in your own upbringing. But what would you say are like the sort of first steps that we can take to recognizing that behavior and breaking that cycle ourselves?
Yeah, I think that's such a great question, because a lot of the time people think that, there is one particular way to break cycles and that you just do the complete opposite to what your parent did, basically. You have this experience as a child, you think, okay, well, I'm not going to be anything like that. And you go for a complete opposite. And quite often that ends up being quite unhealthy as well. It's almost like a pendulum swing. And what we're aiming for is kind of in that middle. I would say the first steps in becoming a cycle breaker and in changing the pattern that you have for parenting and kind of the blueprint is that self-awareness. What kind of experiences have I had, and in what way do they impact my behaviors and who I am today? That's probably the biggest thing for cycle breakers, is gaining that self-awareness, understanding yourself. A lot of things about parenting are written about, okay, your child will have this milestone, your child will do this. But actually, in reality, parenting is about the parent first and foremost. What makes you tick? And there's an old expression of your parenting journey starts in your nursery, or something
Yeah.
to that effect. I always miss that one up, but it's something along those lines, because what we become are products of our own parents' parenting.
Yeah.
So first understanding that and how that impacts you, becoming aware of what your triggers are and that kind of thing, because nothing will trigger you like your children. And by that, I mean, you might be looking at your children doing something. And if I had a penny for every time somebody had said to me, oh my goodness, my kids are so immature compared to what I was at that age. I was doing this or I had to do that. And you think, okay, yeah, was that healthy for you to be doing those things at that age? And then when you reflect on that, you go, oh no, it wasn't actually that my kids are immature. My kids are appropriately mature for their age. And I was parentified and I was made to be doing this and I was carrying this burden when I shouldn't have been. So
Yeah.
becoming aware of those things and learning about your own experiences is kind of the biggest and the most important part. And then actively choosing to do the work on yourself and to do the work to heal some of those experiences you've had. And I think we often think about healing as a bit of a yellow brick road where eventually we get to the Emerald City and we're all done, tick the box, thanks for coming, we've healed. And that's not the reality at all. Healing is a lifelong process, especially when you've grown up in a toxic environment with toxic parents, because you are essentially unpicking the fabric of you, and you're essentially unconditioning yourself from those learned experiences and those learned behaviors and what you've been conditioned to believe about how a parent-child relationship should look and what you've been conditioned to believe about yourself. So all of those things that you are now working to undo and working to relearn, and you are reparenting yourself, making the active choice to do those things and to commit to being that person that constantly works on themselves, that holds themselves accountable. That's a massive part of being a cycle breaker.
That's amazing. One sec. Oh, there we go. Right. Yeah, no, I think that's huge. Being able to, like you said, being able to reflect on your own actions and unpack that and work on breaking those cycles is a huge part of it. And I think it's I found it quite difficult being a parent,
Mm.
because I'm then going back and remembering certain things from my own childhood and being like, oh, oh, I don't remember that. Oh, that suddenly come back to me. Um,
Mm.
and in some ways it almost like brings some of that old trauma to the surface, doesn't it? And then you have to recognize it, work out where it came from, why you feel that way, why it was so triggering, and then sort of like work on how to fix that in the future so that it's not as triggering going forward. It's really interesting. I think sometimes, like, my middle one called me stupid the other day. I
Mm.
found that really triggering, and
Yeah.
remembered something that happened when I was younger, I was revising for my GCSEs, and my stepdad called me stupid, and he was like, "Are you stupid or something?" And I was just like, "Whoa," you know.
Yeah.
But I was really triggered by that, and I just had to step away. And I was like, first of all, we don't use that word. Second of all, that's not very kind. But
Mm.
like, we're not going to say that. I would never call you stupid. Please don't call me stupid.
Yeah.
I was called you stupid. That's they're the problem here. So,
Mm.
we've had to go through all of that as well. And it's very difficult. I think there's a lot of things when you're parenting as well that are brought to the surface that you have to then unpick and handle. It can be quite overwhelming sometimes, can't it? So yeah, it's a fun
I
one.
think it can be really overwhelming, and I think it can be really challenging. Like you say, those little moments, they're so sprung on you,
Yeah.
and they can be so overwhelming. You'd have no kind of pre-warning that that was coming, and especially if it's a term that's not used in your home, that's something that you think, okay, well, where's that come from? And then you're working against things that other people have done, and it's all a part of the process. But actually being able to say, I'm going to need to step away from that for a minute, and then coming back and saying, you know what, that's not kind. And I wouldn't do that to you. I don't expect you to do that to me. That's probably a very different reaction to what you would have experienced when you were younger. And for to what a lot of listeners, I would imagine, would experience if they'd have called their parents stupid, back in the day, that might have been a clip around the ear, or it might have been a good screaming at. But ultimately, you didn't really learn anything in that situation other than to be frightened. And we've got this faux illusion of how that would equate to respect for our parents, when it wouldn't. It would equate to fear of your parent. And they're two very different things. So we can build that relationship with our child even in these moments where there are pitfalls and there are things that happen. And that's something that I talk about quite a lot in section 3 of the book, of what to do when these things happen, where there is maybe a glitch that you didn't foresee, or there's been a breakdown in the relationship, because that will happen in all relationships, including perfectly healthy, normal ones. And how do we build that repair? How do we have those difficult conversations?
Yeah, yeah. No, exactly. And I mean, your book actually does include like practical exercises for cycle breaking as well, like journaling prompts and the process of healing from dysfunctional family patterns. Can you tell me a bit more about the exercises within the book itself?
Yes, I can do. Yeah. So I call them the Cycle Breakers Toolkit, and
Right.
they are scattered throughout all of the book. The book's broken down into 4 different sections. So we start off with section 1, where we're talking about looking back at your childhood. What were your experiences? What constitutes abuse? What constitutes a toxic family childhood, or a toxic childhood? A lot of people will say to me, well, was it really that bad? Like, I remember bits of it, but I don't remember it was that bad. And then they'll go on to explain to you some of the most horrific examples of child abuse you can come up with. But actually, was it that bad?
Yeah.
And that's the same from people who've had what they would consider mildly abusive childhoods, or just emotionally abusive childhoods, all the way through to some of the most severe cases. It's always internalized as a child. So we look at that and we think about, what does it actually mean to grow up in a toxic family? What does that look like? And where are you at now? And section 2 is a lot about the stigma and the shame of setting those boundaries. How do we set those boundaries? What do boundaries look like? How do we set them? And throughout those 2, there are different exercises to kind of get you to think about what those experiences are. There are some exercises, particularly in section 2, to talk about anxiety. How do you deal with those feelings? I'm sure a lot of listeners will relate if they've been in a toxic family dynamic where you're going to have to try and set a boundary, or you're going to have to say, that's not acceptable to do that around my kids, mum.
Yeah.
And how do you deal with that? What are some practical tools that you can use to navigate those anxious feelings and to reach a place of calm and to move forward? And we talk a lot about the stigma from the outside world and the experiences that you might face. And in section 3, there are a lot of exercises that you can share with your child, and because that's all about parenting without the blueprint. How do we parent now? Now that we understand this bit that's gone on and us as parents, What next? How do we actually break that cycle? Where's the acceptance around those things? And then in section 4, we look a lot at you, and it's called Freedom to Be You. And it's all about learning a bit more about yourself, becoming self-aware. And there are loads of exercises in that section in particular, things like your Johari window, which is commonly used in psychology to help you understand a little bit more about yourself. What are the traits that you identify with? What are your core values? A lot of people who've grown up in toxic family dynamics are denied a sense of self.
Yeah.
You suppress yourself as a child in order to be what your parent needs in that moment, whether you're doing it consciously or subconsciously, whether
Yeah.
you're listening to the podcast now thinking, oh, I did do that, or whether you are already well and truly aware that you did it, or whether you think, well, did I really? I mean, I guess I had to look after the kids when mum was, busy working and I was doing this, or, whatever the experience might have been.
Yeah.
But did I suppress my sense of self? And what do I actually know about myself? Have I ever given any thought to that? So there are lots of exercises in there to help you unlock that.
I think that's really interesting. When I was at college, I studied psychology for an A level. And
Mm,
I think that was the exercise we found hardest, was going through the Johari window. I think it's
mm,
really important for anyone to look at that and go through that. It was definitely, I found it very difficult to pick it apart. And I think part of that was because of my people pleasing tendencies anyway, which I now know are also like linked to my trauma, but also partly linked to my ADHD as well.
mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I feel like a lot of the time I would take on the things that other people liked to give me that sense of self. So it was like,
Mm-hmm.
oh well, um, my mum really likes history. I like history. I mean, I do like history, but
Mm-hmm.
or my friends really like doing this thing. Oh, so I must really like doing it too.
Yeah.
But actually going through and also working out those core values, those things that are, that make you you, that give you your moral standards and stuff like that as well. Really important. And I mean, yeah, I feel like I need to go do it again now that I'm not 16 and at college anymore.
Do you know, and I think this is the other thing as well. A lot of people will say to me, oh, yeah, I did this kind of thing when I was younger. And it's like, great, that is really useful when you are younger. However, what about if you did it now? Because I bet your answers would be so different because your life experiences change you. And even as you go from not having children to becoming a parent, that changes you. And those different values that you might hold, those different ideas about yourself that you might hold, things that might come up for you that previously wouldn't have done. And interestingly, the majority of my clients that I work with as a coach and trainee therapist, and that I speak to, people I speak to within the community of Unfollowing Mum, the
Yeah,
majority of them didn't even consider challenging their relationship with their parent until they had children.
yeah,
And the big kind of question when you're doubting yourself and you're thinking, was my childhood that bad? Or you're thinking, well, what's kind of going on for me here? I think I had a great childhood. Is okay, what if that childhood was your child's childhood?
no, exactly.
And immediately people completely change.
I think that was one of the big turning points for me when I had my eldest, was, did I want to expose her to him?
Mm,
Did I want him having any sort of impact on her life? Like, would she be better for it? Would she be worse for it? Like, what what would the impact be? And that was huge,
mm,
absolutely massive for me. Um, and that was really the turning point. That was when I sort of went like bare minimum contact kind of thing, only see each other on really special occasions. And it was when like 2 years had passed and we hadn't gone to see him and she stopped asking about him, that I felt that sort of relief,
mm,
that that there wasn't that burden there, that we had to go and see him anymore. And and I mean, I mentioned this on the podcast episode we did together for your podcast as well, was we went to go and visit him for like Christmas lunch, and she asked if she could go outside with him, and they went outside, just the two of them. And when they came back, she was ready to leave.
Mm.
And it all seemed, she seemed really awkward and like she wanted to go. And I mean, we were packing up to go anyway. Um, but I said to her in the car, I was like, "You okay? You know, what did he say?" And she was just like, she didn't want to talk about it.
Mm.
But mm, she must have been about 6 when that happened. She's 8 now. She hasn't seen him since. Um, she's going to be 9 in April, so it's been a while. Um, but she just didn't want to talk about it, and she hasn't spoken about it. And
Mm.
she kind of said that she didn't understand what he was saying anyway. Um, but that really made my final decision, I think, very easy, because it was no, I don't want him to have that effect on her ever again. My
Mm.
protective instincts came over me, and I was like, "No, that's not happening. No, we're not doing that again." You know? And it was really, I feel like that was such an interesting point that you brought up. Do we want to expose our children to the same things that we went through? And I feel like if the answer to that is no, then you're already on the right track, aren't you? For being a
Y-
better parent than the parents that you had, because you're willing to do anything to change that.
Yeah,
Anything.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely. And I think as well, this is not a book that says you have to go no contact, or, that's the preferred method or anything along those lines, because every single family dynamic will be different. This is a book that asks you to think about you as a parent and what you want to be as a parent, how you want to relate to your child, how to have that healthy relationship. And there is a section in the book where we talk about being no contact with grandparents or low contact with grandparents, because unfortunately for a lot of people, that is the safest option.
yeah,
And for some families, they can recognize that their parents are very different grandparents, and that is wonderful. And they can have a somewhat civil but removed relationship for themselves, or they can perhaps take time and talk about things. They can find accountability and they can find some validation. But for the vast majority, it isn't the case. And that's really difficult to navigate. So I thought that that was really important to include in the book, is how to talk to your children about things like estrangement, how to talk to them about things like low contact, why they maybe don't have the same relationship with their grandparent, or even a grandparent who you're not no or low contact with, but they're just completely ambivalent to your children whilst utterly obsessed with your siblings' children. That shows up as well in so
yeah,
many different circumstances. So there are so many different ways in which this toxic family dynamic can look for different people, and there's no one size fits all. But the question remains the same of what is healthy for my child and what is the right thing for them.
yeah. No, 100%. So, I mean, we've sort of covered, I feel like we sort of covered this off at slightly earlier on, but you also talk about healing your inner child, to contributing to becoming a better parent.
Mhm.
How, what's the connection between, like, really understanding the root of our, our connection with our childhood wounds and things like that, to growing into parenthood?
I think the connection is, if you don't know they're there and you aren't aware of these wounds and you aren't aware of the experiences that you've had and how they shape you as a person, then you can't challenge them if there's certain behaviors that you recognize you are passing down. And there's a whole section in the book about reparenting yourself, and reparenting is a term that I think is brilliant, because
Yeah,
when we get to adulthood, we become the one who is in charge of us, and we have our own responsibilities for ourselves, for our behavior. We can understand the hows and the whys of why we act the way we do, why we behave the way we do, perhaps why we have the traits that we have. But ultimately, it's our responsibility as adults to navigate those, to heal those, to do better.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important. So for me, reparenting is a term that really encompasses all of that, of looking at yourself, looking at those inner child wounds, those inner teen wounds, which we talk a lot about the inner teenager, because I have so many experiences with clients and with people in the community who will say to me, I feel like I've moved past that part that is devastated and that is trying to be the good daughter or the good son and is trying to reach out to be the best that I can be and to please my parent. I feel like I've gone past that. And now I just feel filled with rage and I really don't understand it. I feel like I just want to make things difficult. I feel like if, even if we've got a low contact relationship and they ask me if I need some milk dropping by. No, I don't, thank you very much. And I just feel so petty and irritated and angry at everything. That's your inner teenager knocking at the unfairness of it all. And it can sound really woo-woo to talk about things like your inner child and your inner teen. And interestingly, often people who need to work on reparenting and who need to do the inner child and the inner teen work are the ones who find it the most uncomfortable because they don't have a positive relationship with that inner child or that inner teen.
Yeah.
I hate inner child work because I don't have a positive, or I didn't have a positive relationship with that younger me. I still viewed them through the lens of my mother's lens, really, of that frustration. And I still viewed them with a lot of resentment myself, which is really interesting. And a lot of people really struggle with the idea of doing that. So there are exercises in the book and ways in the book that we can talk about inner teen and inner child without it feeling too uncomfortable. There's lots of ways in which you can work to heal those wounds, work to become more aware of yourself. And ultimately, the goal is to be a better parent for your children, but also to be a healthier and happier person for yourself. I think as parents, we're quite often lost in the conversation. There's
Yeah.
a lot of focus on what's right for my child. And I absolutely agree that's vitally important. What is right for your child? Because that's going to be different for every child. But also what's right for you as a parent? What do you need as a person and as a parent?
I think that's yeah, it's so important, isn't it? And I'm loving that analogy of the inner teenager as well, because yeah, there's still I feel like I was definitely in that phase while my dad was in hospital and we were doing so much to help him with so little understanding of what had gone on behind the scenes, and the mountains we'd moved to help him with little to no thanks. In fact, at one point he just told me to fuck off,
Yeah.
which was brilliant. But I did definitely go back to that, that stage of being the teenager who was slamming doors and whacking Lincoln Park on at full volume, and the big black eyeliner and the clodhoppy stampy boots.
Yeah.
And I think it was so, but it was so important to go through that stage of feeling like that and actually getting all of that anger that I'd had pent up for so long towards him out, and realizing that I was actually angry with him. It wasn't just disappointment and and those feelings of abandonment. It was also that anger that you don't understand. I'm a fully grown adult woman who is helping you through this process, and you still treat
Mm.
me like a child. But in his eyes, that was where I'd stopped. I was always going to be that 7-year-old girl who, needed mollycoddling and looking after, or ignoring and sticking in the corner of a pub, being taught how to play darts. Not
Mm.
the girl who has not the fully grown adult woman who has 3 children of her own and knows how to not only run a house but run a business and all the other stuff that I do. It was really interesting, like trying to push through all of that anger, um, of his lack of understanding of how time had moved on and changed, because for him that was it. It had stopped there. Nothing had ever happened since that point. If you
Mm.
know what I mean. It was interesting. And so I feel like by being no contact with him, I actually have the freedom to move forward, because
Yeah.
now I'm not stuck in that past of that person. I can go forward knowing full well that I have a future, and that things are just going to be better without that, plug there, if you know what I mean. How
Mhm.
I'm trying to say it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Mhm.
you talk about creating a new template for parenting in your book. What
Mhm.
are some of the key principles or strategies for parenting without the healthy modeling that many people, have never experienced growing up? How do we create that new template when we've got such a bad experience of being parented when we were younger? It's difficult to work out where to make those changes and how to move forward, isn't it? How do we go forward and make that new template for how we want to raise our own kids?
It is really difficult. And again, it's going to be one of those things that isn't a one size fits all, because one of the first things that we have to do is recognize our children as individuals and recognize that we're creating, or we're supporting and growing little people here. They're going to have their own ideas, and encouraging that autonomy in them, encouraging boundaries, encouraging them to set boundaries with you, which can be really triggering when your children start setting boundaries with you,
Mm,
but encouraging them to do it nonetheless and setting boundaries with them. And what we want to be doing realistically as parents is offering them enough freedom that they can discover who they are,
yeah,
and nurturing that side of them and encouraging that side of them, whilst also creating enough boundaries to keep them safe and to encourage them to explore that side of self, whilst also knowing that they have that safe hub. And I think it is really challenging, especially when you haven't had that experience. If you've had and I think I touched on this at the beginning, if you've had a really authoritarian parent who wouldn't let you go out, wouldn't let you do anything, it was their way or the highway,
yeah,
the the natural inclination is often to swing on the pendulum all the way to being a very permissive parent who lets your child do whatever. You might not be there handing them the joint, but you would be like, okay, yes, if you want to go out, that's absolutely fine, because you remember what it felt like to be so controlled and to be so stifled. But actually, what we want is to sit in the middle there, is to have those boundaries where sometimes your kids are going to push back and they're not going to like it. And we talk about in the book how to deal with it when they don't like it, because sometimes you are the bad guy and you will get, I hate you, you've ruined my life, you've done this. It's how do you navigate that?
yeah.
And one of my favorite sayings is to strike when the iron is cold. And we
Oh,
talk about the different approaches, especially within child psychology in the book, of how um, the advice that's put forward for children and how to navigate relationships with them. But strike while the iron is cold is in those moments where your kids storm off up to their room and I hate you, and they slam the door and I don't like you, you're meanie, or you're a dickhead, whatever it might be that they have decided to call you or say to you on that day. Let them. Let them know that you're there. Let them know that you are available to talk whenever they want to and whenever they're ready. And remove yourself from the situation and just give them that space, give them that time, allow them to feel those feelings. And what I've noticed, especially with my own teenager, is that allowing him to have that space sometimes and saying to him, you go off, you storm off, that's fine. Come back in 5 minutes, please, or come back in 10 minutes, or I'm going to be here when you need to come back,
yeah.
gives him that opportunity to kind of burn that out, and allowing children to have those big emotions, not teaching them to suppress it in the way that we were taught. I think those are really important parts of becoming that parent and creating that healthy blueprint with your children.
Yeah, it's so important, isn't it? And yeah, like you said, my teenage years, I was really controlled, and then when I went to uni, I had complete and utter freedom, and that
Mm,
was even that was really difficult to work out. It was like, oh, well, I can stay up as late as I want, and I can drink as much as I want, and I can come home whenever I want, and I can spend whatever I want. Oh, this is
yeah.
odd. And so in a way, I kind of feel like I've already gone the complete opposite way when I went off to uni and I was able to do my own things. And I feel like there's that part of me that is still very people pleasery. I want my kids to have everything and do everything. But then I've also started to really look at what are my limitations. I work full time. So although I have friends who work part time or are, stay at home mums or are teachers and have half term and summer holidays off, I don't have that luxury. I have 28 days a year, and I take those when I can and how I can to fit around my kids. And so if they can't go to like every single thing that their friend goes to, that's fine. I have to. It's me in a way that has to make peace with that. My kids are never seem disappointed or upset that they weren't able to do absolutely everything that their friends were. But there's that part of me that goes, oh, they had that opportunity to do that thing and I couldn't say yes, and I feel really bad and guilty about it. And then I'm like, but you know, they already have so many more opportunities than I did. You know, I'm very fortunate to be making more money than my parents did, and so they can do clubs and things that I never could have imagined doing. And so it's really interesting trying to, come back to that and rethink about, the guilt and the problems that I have
Yeah.
with my own limitations. Yeah.
It is. And it's interesting that you mentioned that, because quite often what we tend to do as cycle breakers in particular, but I think as all parents, to be entirely fair, or all good parents, we tend to strive for perfection. And we seem to think that anything less than perfection is somehow a failure. And there's this real kind of, oh, well, I've let my child down, or I've not done this. You are going to get things wrong. Regardless of your best intention, you are going to hurt your child at times. You are going to mess up at times. You are going to let them down at times. And making your peace with that is really hard, especially if you are the child who has been let down and you are the child who has been neglected or treated badly. The thought of hurting your child is horrible for any parent, but it feels like it's doubly so for someone who's grown up being nothing but hurt. And I think the sad reality is we are humans and we are fallible and we are always going to make mistakes. And one of the things that I teach people and that I talk about a lot in the book is how striving for perfection is actually in its own way unhealthy. And I have a lot of clients in particular who their parents were perfectionists, and that's often where they, oh, well, I guess I'm just the worst mother in the world, or, oh, well, what do you mean? Your childhood was great from dad, comes from, because there's that disconnect between I could have got this wrong and I might have messed up, and actually being able to hear and validate your kids and understand that sometimes you do get it wrong and be accountable for that. And we talk about what actual accountability and apologies actually look like, what to do when you get it wrong, because you will, and how to navigate that guilt and that shame that so often comes up for cycle breakers and people who've grown up in toxic families, because you will get it wrong. And I really can't reiterate that enough, that nobody is expecting perfection, actually, least of all your children. You're expecting perfection and you're setting yourself up for failure with it. And that's something that is really important to work on.
I think that was one of the things that I really took away with me from going through therapy a couple of years ago. Like I just sat there and I was like, yeah, no, I need to do this. This is something I have to do. It won't just benefit me, it's going to benefit everyone around me. And it made such a huge impact on my life, having a year's worth of therapy, really unpacking those childhood issues that I had, and where my anger and my, those sort of like spark ignition points were, and things like that, and how I could, start to try and regulate myself. But equally, it was understanding the difference between guilt and shame.
Yeah.
What is the difference? How do we unpack that? So like if I let someone down, I'd feel really guilty about it. And my therapist was like, do you feel guilty or do you feel shame? Are you ashamed of the fact that you didn't look in your diary when you were doing this thing and you double booked it and now you've let them down? And it was like, oh, okay. Maybe it is shame, not guilt. And then it was unpacking that and working that out. And I feel like that self-compassion, that being able to look at yourself and go, you are human, you
Mm-hmm.
make mistakes, and then giving yourself that space to breathe and recognize that is so important. It's not letting yourself off the hook at all, but it's giving yourself the kindness and the understanding to to just let it go,
Yeah.
to not focus on it and sit there at 3 o'clock in the morning going, oh my God, that thing I said when I was 13, when I was with that group of people, and
Yeah.
oh my God, I can never take that back. They don't even remember who the hell you are anymore. They've moved on. You move on too.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for joining me. I really cannot, as I said at the beginning of this, I cannot wait to get my hands on a copy of your book and to really go through it. I think that it's going to be so helpful and cathartic and healing. I really cannot wait to grab myself a copy. But now I'm going to ask you all of the promo questions, Harriet.
Okie dokie.
When does your book officially go on sale?
My book is officially on sale on the 7th of November.
Amazing.
That's in the UK and multiple other countries. It will be available in the US and Canada around April time at the moment. There's a bit of a delay over there, but yeah, it's available in the UK and other countries from the 7th of November.
Amazing. And I know people can already pre-order your book.
They can.
But where else will they be able to get it? Like what shops are we looking at?
At the moment, it's available at Waterstones, WH Smith's, lots of independent stores, and it's also available on Amazon.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining me again, Harriet. It's been amazing to have you with me and to really go through all of that and unpack that. If you guys have enjoyed listening to this episode of Mum's Work and Chaos, please do like, subscribe and share. But also, please head over to Harriet's podcast, Unfollowing Mum, where you can subscribe on all the major podcasting channels, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts, but also YouTube as well. See you soon. Thanks so much for joining me on Mum's Work and Chaos. If you've enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and leave a review. It really helps us to reach other mums out there. Don't forget to follow us on social media at Mum's Work and Chaos Podcast for more updates, laughs, and support. Until next time, remember, we're all in this chaos together.